A trip to Paris, where I had my first kiss at 18. I never imagined that one impulsive trip to Paris would change everything I thought I knew about myself. I was just 18, standing under the golden lights of the Eiffel Tower, when something happened that I'll never forget. A moment so unexpected, so intense, it marked me forever. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of discovering a side of myself I didn't even know existed. Before we dive into this unforgettable story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss the emotions and surprises waiting ahead. Paris had always felt like a dream to me, something distant and untouchable, like a perfect scene in a movie I'd never quite be a part of. But there I was, 18 years old, standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower for the first time, the iron giant glowing against the night sky. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts and distant rain. My heart raced, though I couldn't say if it was from the beauty of the city or from the person standing right next to me. His name was Adrian, and even now, just thinking of that night, I can still picture the way his eyes reflected the city lights. Soft, curious, and full of something I couldn't quite understand at the time. We'd met by complete accident 3 days earlier at a small cafe tucked away in Montmartre. I was lost, struggling to order a coffee in broken French, completely out of my depth. Adrian had stepped in with a knowing smile, switching effortlessly to English and saving me from my own embarrassment. "You should try the chocolate chaud," he said, his voice calm and rich like the drink he recommended. "It's much better than the coffee here." I remember how easily we fell into conversation, sitting by the window as the rain poured outside. His laugh was warm. His stories about growing up in Paris felt like poetry, and before I realized it, we'd spent the entire afternoon talking. And now, 3 days later, we stood under the Eiffel Tower, a place I'd only seen in postcards. Yet it felt strangely familiar, like I'd been waiting my whole life to be there. Adrian turned to me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his black coat. His scarf was loosely wrapped around his neck, and a few strands of dark hair fell across his forehead despite the light breeze. "You know," he started, his voice lower now, almost blending with the soft hum of the city, "this place isn't just about romance like everyone says. It's about moments. The kind you remember even when everything else fades away." I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my ears, and I couldn't understand why. I'd never looked at another guy like this before, never felt this pull, this strange heat under my skin. But standing there, inches from him, I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I turned my eyes away, focusing on the lights reflecting over the Seine. But then, without thinking, I asked the question that had been stuck in my throat all night. "Have you ever had a moment like that?" Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, and I felt it, the warmth of his presence against the cool night air. "Maybe," he said softly. "Maybe I'm having one right now." I froze. I could barely process his words before he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was so light it almost didn't feel real. And then, as if the city itself had orchestrated the perfect timing, a soft rain began to fall, just as the Eiffel Tower lit up for its hourly sparkling show. Everything around me faded, the lights, the tourists, the noise. All I could feel was him. And before I had time to think about what it meant, before I could remind myself of who I was supposed to be or what I thought I wanted, Adrian leaned in. His lips touched mine, soft, gentle, uncertain, but full of something raw and honest. For a moment, I forgot about everything. I forgot about the fear, the confusion, the questions I hadn't yet found the courage to ask myself. When he pulled away, his face lingered close to mine. His breath was warm against my cheek, and his eyes searched mine as if waiting for a sign that he hadn't misread everything. But I couldn't say anything. My lips still tingled, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts and none of them making sense. That night, I walked back to my hotel under the soft Parisian rain, my fingers still remembering the way his hand had felt in mine. I had come to Paris looking for adventure. But what I found was the start of something much bigger than that. The morning after that night under the Eiffel Tower, I woke up feeling like I'd stepped out of someone else's life and straight back into my own, with a crash. The soft Parisian light streamed through the thin hotel curtains, and for a moment, I let myself believe that it had all been a dream. But then I touched my lips, and it was like I could still feel his kiss lingering there. My mind raced through the night before, replaying every second. Adrian's words echoed in my head. Maybe I'm having one right now. That soft, tentative kiss, his fingers brushing against mine. And then, my silence. I hadn't said a single word after it happened. I'd walked away in the rain like some tragic character from a movie, my heart pounding but my head filled with confusion. I sat up in bed, running a hand through my hair, wondering what in the world I was supposed to do now. I didn't know what that moment meant. Was it just Paris playing tricks on me? The romance of the city, the magic of the lights, the perfect storm of beauty and vulnerability? Or was it something more? My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my spiral. Adrian, meet me at the little cafe in Montmartre, noon? My stomach twisted. It was the same cafe where we'd first met, the place where everything started. I didn't even think before replying, me. Okay, I'll be there. The hours leading up to that meeting felt like years. I changed my clothes 3 times, unsure if I should look casual or like I hadn't spent all morning panicking about seeing him again. My mind kept throwing the same question at me. What do I even say to him? By the time I made it to the cafe, my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. And there he was. Adrian, sitting by the window with 2 cups of coffee already in front of him. His dark hair was a little messy, and he wore that same scarf from last night. When he saw me, he smiled. It wasn't a smug smile or one that held expectations. It was soft, patient, like he understood I was still figuring things out. I sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The city hummed quietly outside, and the faint scent of fresh croissants lingered in the air between us. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. "You left so quickly last night," he said, his fingers tracing circles on the side of his coffee cup. I swallowed hard. I didn't know what to say. His eyes lifted to meet mine, and there was no judgment in them, just curiosity, maybe even hope. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to," he said softly. I needed to know if it was a mistake, if I misread everything. My chest tightened. This wasn't some game to him. He wasn't trying to confuse me or play with my head. He was standing there, completely open, completely vulnerable, and all he wanted was the truth. I looked down at my hands, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't a mistake. I don't know what it means yet." Adrian reached across the table, his fingers lightly brushing over mine. That same warmth from the night before rushed through me, and this time I didn't pull away. "You don't have to know," he said quietly. "Not today, not tomorrow. Just don't run from it. Stay in the moment, with me." I looked up at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of a decision I hadn't known I'd been avoiding for years. It wasn't about labels or figuring everything out in one day. It was about allowing myself to feel something real, something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. In that tiny cafe in Montmartre, as the rain started again outside and the city blurred beyond the windows, I squeezed his hand back. "I'm still scared," I admitted, my voice low. Adrian smiled gently. "Me too," he said. "But sometimes the best things in life are the ones that scare us the most." That day, we stayed in that cafe until the rain stopped and the sky cleared over Paris, and for the first time I didn't think about what was supposed to happen next. I just let it happen. The days that followed blurred into a series of moments I didn't have the courage to name. Every afternoon, Adrian and I found ourselves walking through the cobblestone streets of Montmartre, sitting quietly along the Seine, or exploring hidden corners of the city I never would have discovered on my own. And yet, despite the hours spent together, neither of us spoke about that night under the Eiffel Tower. But the silence wasn't empty, it was charged. Every glance, every accidental brush of his hand against mine felt heavier, like we were both teetering on the edge of something neither of us fully understood but couldn't ignore. One particular afternoon, we wandered into the Jardin du Luxembourg. The autumn air was crisp, the trees dressed in shades of gold and crimson. Children played near the fountains, their laughter echoing through the gardens, and artists sat quietly along the paths, sketching lovers, life, and fleeting beauty. Adrian and I found a quiet bench beneath a towering chestnut tree. He leaned back, his arms stretched along the backrest, his fingers just barely grazing my shoulder. I felt the warmth of his hand through my jacket, a simple touch that seemed to set my whole body alight with confusion and something dangerously close to longing. "I used to come here as a kid," Adrian said after a long pause, his eyes following a small boat gliding across the fountain pool. "Back when things felt simpler." I turned to look at him. His face was calm, but there was a distant sadness behind his smile. "Do you miss it?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not really. I just miss being certain about things." I felt my chest tighten. It was like he'd spoken the words sitting heavy on my own heart. "I'm starting to think certainty is overrated," I admitted, my voice quiet. Adrian turned his head toward me, his gaze locking onto mine. The air between us felt heavier now, the sounds of the park fading into a dull hum. "Maybe," he said softly, "but sometimes uncertainty feels like drowning." And then, in that vulnerable silence, his hand slipped from the back of the bench and settled gently on my shoulder. I didn't move. I couldn't. His fingers pressed lightly, his touch both tentative and grounding. The moment stretched endlessly, and then it happened. So simple, so innocent, yet it felt monumental. Adrian leaned in, his forehead brushing gently against mine. He didn't kiss me. He didn't try to force anything. He just stayed there, breathing the same air, his presence overwhelming every sense I had. I closed my eyes, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks, my heart pounding loud enough I was sure he could hear it. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered, my voice shaky. Adrian pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. "Neither do I," he admitted with a small, sad smile. "But I don't think we have to figure it all out right now." He stood, offering me his hand. "Come on," he said, his voice lighter again, almost playful. "There's a little bookstore nearby that smells like old dreams. I think you'll like it." I took his hand. I didn't even hesitate this time. As we walked toward the bookstore, I realized how easy it was to fall into rhythm with him, like our steps had somehow learned each other's pace. But as night crept over Paris and we lost ourselves between shelves lined with worn pages and forgotten stories, something happened that made my heart stutter. While reaching for a book, Adrian's sleeve pulled back, and for the first time, I noticed a thin, almost faded scar running along the inside of his wrist. It was there and gone in a second as he adjusted his sleeve, but the sight of it sent a wave of questions crashing through my mind. Who had he been before this version of himself? What had he endured before our lives crossed paths in this strange, beautiful city? Before I could ask, he turned to me with a mischievous smile and held out a copy of Le Petit Prince. "Every lost boy needs this book," he said playfully, but there was something behind his smile, something unspoken. I took the book, my fingers brushing his, and in that quiet moment, I realized we weren't just crossing lines of friendship and romance. We were crossing into parts of each other's pasts we hadn't dared reveal, and I didn't know if I was ready for what came next. The following day, Paris felt heavier, as if the air itself knew something was coming. Dark clouds hung low over the city, the kind that promised rain but never seemed to deliver it. The Seine moved slower, its surface dull and gray under the weight of the overcast sky. I couldn't stop thinking about that scar, that thin, pale reminder of something Adrian hadn't shared yet, and I didn't know if it was my place to ask or if I even wanted to hear the answer. By the time I made my way to our usual cafe, my mind was already a mess of thoughts. But when I arrived, Adrian wasn't alone. There was a man sitting across from him, his posture sharp and commanding in a way that immediately made me uncomfortable. His dark hair was slicked back, his suit impeccably tailored. And yet it wasn't his appearance that unsettled me. It was the tension in Adrian's shoulders, the way his hands stayed clenched together in his lap, his head slightly bowed as if he were bracing for something. I hesitated by the entrance, watching them through the window. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. The man leaned forward, his expression cold, his words clearly cutting. Adrian didn't argue. He just sat there, enduring it. And then the man stood abruptly, threw a few bills on the table, and left without even glancing in my direction. Adrian sat there for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on nothing, his entire body seeming smaller than I'd ever seen it. I walked in quietly, approaching the table as Adrian lifted his head, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're early," he said, his voice low and tired. "Who was that?" I asked before I could stop myself. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, leaning back against the chair as if the weight of the entire world rested on his shoulders. "My brother," he answered finally. "Mathis." I sat down across from him, feeling the weight of something important hanging between us. "I didn't know you had a brother," I said carefully. Adrian's eyes flicked up to meet mine, and in them, I saw a storm even darker than the skies outside. "There's a lot you don't know about me," he admitted. I wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand the way he had taken mine so many times before, but I didn't. I waited. "He's the perfect son," Adrian continued, his voice bitter now. "Graduated from the best schools, joined the family business, did everything our father expected. And then there's me, the one who ran away from all of it, from the expectations, the responsibilities, from him." Adrian let out a shaky breath, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "He came to remind me of what I walked away from, and who I'll never be." The scar flashed in my mind again, and the words slipped out before I could hold them back. "Is that why?" I asked softly. "The scar?" Adrian went still. His fingers froze, and his shoulders tensed again. For a long, painful moment, I thought he might shut me out completely. But then, without looking at me, he spoke. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A different version of me. One that didn't believe life could be more than what they told me it was. That I could be more. My chest ached. I couldn't imagine the kind of loneliness that left marks like that, on the skin and on the heart. "Adrian," I started, but he stood before I could finish. "Come with me," he said suddenly, his eyes clearing just a little, like he'd made some silent decision. Without waiting for my response, he walked out into the street. I followed, my heart pounding against my ribs. He led me through narrow alleys and winding streets until we reached a small overlook above the city. Despite the gray skies, the view was breathtaking. Paris stretched out before us, beautiful even under the weight of its own storms. Adrian turned to me, his expression open, raw. "I brought you here because this is where I made a promise to myself," he said, "that I'd stop living for everyone else and try to figure out what I wanted. But I never imagined someone would actually stand beside me while I did." I swallowed hard, the intensity of his words crashing into me like a wave. "And what do you want, Adrian?" I asked, my voice barely steady. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw it. Certainty. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I think I want to start with you." And just like that, every wall I'd built to protect myself began to crumble. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to his words. "I think I want to start with you." It was simple, almost casual, but nothing about how I felt was simple. That one sentence had unlocked something I'd spent years trying to keep shut away, something I wasn't sure I was brave enough to face. The next morning I found myself walking toward the overlook again, hoping I might find him there. The city was just beginning to stir. The streets smelled faintly of fresh bread and morning rain, and the air held that quiet tension before the day fully wakes. And then, as if the universe had conspired to answer my silent hope, there he was, Adrian, leaning against the stone railing, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, his head tilted toward the cloudy horizon. He heard my footsteps before I could speak and turned, his face lighting up in a way that made my chest tighten. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. "Neither was I," I admitted, stepping closer. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. The world felt still, like the city was holding its breath along with us. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," I finally managed, my voice shaking slightly. "About wanting to start with me." Adrian's expression grew serious, his eyes focused entirely on me. "I meant it," he said, "but I'm not here to push you into anything you're not ready for. I'm not even sure I'm ready, but I want to try." His honesty struck me harder than any romantic confession could have. He wasn't offering perfect promises or fairy tale endings. He was offering something real, uncertain and imperfect, but real. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm in my chest. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above the sound of the wind. Adrian took a slow step closer. "Me too," he whispered. And then, before either of us could let fear win again, I did the one thing I hadn't been brave enough to do before. I reached for his hand. He looked down at our joined fingers, then back at me, his eyes soft but intense. "Is this our first real answer?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly from the weight of the moment. Adrian smiled gently, his fingers tightening around mine. "It doesn't have to be the last one," he said, "but it's enough for today." And standing there, under a sky full of uncertainty, I realized that sometimes the smallest step forward feels like the biggest leap you'll ever take. The rest of my time in Paris passed too quickly. Each day with Adrian felt like stepping into a life I didn't know I was allowed to have. There were no promises, no dramatic declarations, just quiet moments where being near him felt like enough. On my last night, we sat on the banks of the Seine, the city lights dancing on the water. Adrian held my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against my skin. "When you leave tomorrow," he asked softly, "will this just be a memory for you?" I turned to him, my heart pounding. "I don't know what the future holds," I admitted, my voice catching. "But I don't want this to end here." He smiled, his eyes glistening under the city lights. "Then it doesn't have to." As the Eiffel Tower lit up in the distance, I leaned in, this time without hesitation, and kissed him, fully, completely, with everything I'd been too afraid to say. And in that kiss, I knew, some goodbyes aren't endings. They're just the beginning of something we're brave enough to fight for.